Hello, this is Charlie, the chaplain from Harbor Light Hospice, and today I want to talk about one of my very favorite stories from the Bible, from the book of Jeremiah, the story of Jeremiah buying a field. It sounds like a boring real estate transaction, but it's the story of great hope, one that I think we need to pay attention to today. So, if you have a Bible, take it out and let's get started. I'm going to be reading from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 32. This is a very sad time for the nation of Israel. Their great enemy, Babylon, has conquered most of the country except the city of Jerusalem. All the residents who are left are holed up in the city, hoping for freedom that Jeremiah says isn't coming. Jeremiah is sometimes called the weeping prophet because he had to declare the conquering of Jerusalem. But it wasn't just a hopeless story. Jeremiah also promised that after a time of captivity, the Babylonians would go away, and then there would be a great restoration. But because Jeremiah had to bring some very bad news, the king of Israel locked him up in the palace. He was under house arrest. He wasn't allowed to go anywhere, but he was allowed to receive visitors. And one day he was visited by his cousin, Hanamel, who offered to sell him his field. Let's start reading at Jeremiah 32, verse 6. Jeremiah said, "The word of the Lord came to me. Hanamel, the son of Shalem, your uncle, is going to come to you and say, 'Buy my field at Anathoth, because as nearest relative, it is your right and duty to buy it.' Just then, as the Lord had said, my cousin Hanamel came to me in the courtyard of the guard and said, 'Buy my field at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin, since it is your right to redeem it and possess it. Buy it for yourself.' I knew that this was the word of the Lord." Jeremiah continues, "So I bought the field at Anathoth from my cousin Hanamel and weighed out for him 17 shekels of silver. I signed and sealed the deed and had it witnessed. I weighed out the silver on the scales. I took the deed of purchase, the sealed copy containing the terms and conditions, as well as the unsealed copy, and I gave this deed to Baruch, the son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, in the presence of my cousin Hanamel and of the witnesses who had signed the deed and of all the Jews sitting in the courtyard of the guard. In their presence I gave Baruch these instructions. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Take these documents, both the sealed and unsealed copies of the deed of purchase, and put them in a clay jar so they will last a long time. For this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Houses, fields, and vineyards will again be bought in this land." This is the word of the Lord. So while Jeremiah was locked up in the palace and the nation was being overrun by Babylonians, Hanamel, Jeremiah's cousin, came to Jeremiah with a proposition. He offered to sell him a field in his hometown. It was a crazy idea. When your country is being conquered by a foreign power, that's not a good time to invest in real estate. Hanamel was really trying to put one over on Jeremiah. But Jeremiah had already heard from God and received instructions to buy that field. So he agreed to purchase the field Hanamel was offering to sell. He paid way too much for it, and he made a big public deal out of signing the deeds. He did it out in public where everybody could see it, and he had the deeds put in clay jars so that they would last for a long time, so that everyone would know that he had bought that field from his cousin Hanamel. And Jeremiah did this to declare his faith in God's future. Yes, they were about to be conquered. The city of Jerusalem was about to be destroyed, and the temple would be torn down, which actually happened in 586 BC. But then, after a time, the people would be restored and be better than they were before. And when that happened, Jeremiah or his heirs would own one really nice field. Jeremiah knew what he was doing. He knew that God is not about destruction, but about restoration. And when that restoration came, he would own a field. And so he did this to declare his faith in the goodness that God's ultimate future would bring to them. That's something that we need to do sometimes too. Maybe right now, as coronavirus continues to trouble our nation, take many of our citizens and divide us up, we need to do something to remember that someday this will end. Or maybe you're having another kind of problem that's causing you to doubt the goodness of the future. Maybe you need to buy a field. Do something to affirm your faith in the future God is bringing. Throughout my life, I have known people who've done this, and it really, really works. For example, my friend Scott, who I went to seminary with, his last name began with ST, just like mine. So he sat right next to me in the commencement of when we graduated. And when we got our diplomas and went back and sat down, Scott was very emotional. In fact, he was very tearful, and I knew why. When Scott was in his senior year in college, he was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer. And his doctors weren't sure if he was going to live even a year. So Scott bought a field. He didn't just go home, get in bed, and die. He bought a field. He did something to affirm his faith in the future. You know what he did? He enrolled in a 3-year seminary program. He graduated with me cancer-free, and he is about to retire after 39 years of ministry, cancer-free. Another person, Anna, a senior citizen in a church I served in Michigan. One day after Sunday service, she was leaving the church. She drove out of the parking lot and hit a deer. She wasn't injured, but she was scared after that to drive. She didn't want to drive. Every time she got in her car, she would start to shake and her heart would start to pound. And she didn't know whether she was going to be homebound for the rest of her life. So Anna bought a field. You know what she did? She called up her son's friend who ran an auto dealership. And she bought the most expensive Cadillac she could find in that parking lot. And when it was delivered, she knew she couldn't resist driving it. She bought that car for the same reason Jeremiah bought that field, to affirm her faith in the goodness of the future. Anna bought a car that she couldn't resist to drive, and Anna started to drive again. A young woman named Julie, the day after she turned 30 years old, she came to see me at the church office, very distraught. She was 30 years old, single. Julie had an eating disorder that she was working on. She was a very large woman. And she said, "I'm never going to get married. No one is ever going to be able to love me." Julie bought a field. You know what she did? She went out and bought a wedding dress, size 9. And she hung it up on her wall in front of where she placed a treadmill. Every day she walked on that treadmill and looked at that wedding dress. I was transferred. I actually was transferred from that church and went to another church. And about 6 months after I had moved to that new church, Julie called me up and said, "Pastor, I want you to come back and do my wedding." And when I saw her, I couldn't believe it. She fit into that wedding dress, size 9. There are times when we all have to do something that Jeremiah did to affirm our goodness in the future. If you've had a difficult diagnosis from your doctor, maybe you need to buy a field. Or if you're worried about whether this country will ever recover from coronavirus, maybe you should buy a field. Plan a vacation. Maybe even go to China, where all this happened and all this started. Do something to affirm that you believe that God is bringing the future, and that future will be bright. A friend of mine recently sent me a message and told me that she enjoys the videos, and she asked about the guitars that I have hanging in my living room. Well, these guitars represent a way I once bought a field. When I turned 60 years old, I realized that I was going to be retiring someday, and I wasn't sure if my retirement would be productive or joyful. Most of us clergy don't have any hobbies because our lives are the church. And so when we retire, we really don't know what to do with ourselves. We kind of sit around and kind of get bored. And finally, we call the district superintendent and say, "Hey, do you have a church?" Well, I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I either needed a hobby or I could become a greeter at Walmart, which I think I would be good at, but was not really my best option. I've always wanted to learn how to build acoustic guitars, but I never thought I could do it. So I bought a field for my retirement. I took a guitar making class at the Mark Adams School of Woodworking and learned how to build guitars from a wonderful luthier named John Ressler from Sandwich, Illinois. The guitar on my left is right here is the first one I made there in the school. And the guitar on my right is the latest one that I'm still working on. You can see the blue tape where the bridge will go. And I did this to buy a field so that I believe that my retirement will be joyful and productive, and someday, long after I'm gone, someone will be using these instruments that I've made to make beautiful music and to bring joy to people. So someone asked me if I would play one, and I guess I will do that for you now. I'm not going to play it perfectly. You really should never play anything perfectly, because if you play something perfectly, people will expect that all the time. So make sure you make lots of mistakes like I'm about to, but sing and play with joy, because the future that God is bringing is wonderful and bright. got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. And it makes me love everybody, makes me love everybody, makes me love everybody in my soul. Makes me love everybody, makes me love everybody, makes me love everybody in my soul. 'Cause I've got peace like a river, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. Oh, I've got peace like a river, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. 'Cause I've got peace like a river in my... Here comes the big finish. Soul. This is Charlie, the chaplain from Harbor Light Hospice. Stay safe, be well. God loves you, and so do I. I'll see you next time.